Ladies and gentlemen, I've been streaming a lot lately, and as you guys have come and hung out during lore weeks, during all of the rapid leveling as I approach Omni 90, I've been getting a lot of questions about when is certain content, which Mr. Happy put out a beautiful video, so go watch that. It sums up a lot of like when this stuff was kind of roadmapped, but also just questions about like when is an expansion, when is a certain patch. And so I wanted to sit down and kind of go over some of these dates in a super official format here. All right. Oh, yeah. Look at that. See? These professional graphics over here. They're so amazing. All right. Now, first of all, remember there are 0.1, 7s, 8s, 6s, A's, B's. There's all sorts of different things in addition to this, but every patch we get a .x, the number, 1 through 5. There are always 5. And then we get a half patch, .x5, so 0.05, 0.15, and so on, all the way up to patch 5.55. Now, historically, these weeks have been done differently, so it doesn't really matter how the distance between those patches has worked in the past, because the roadmap they announced is supposed to be exactly at that 4 months. It does seem like they're counting that as 8 weeks, with an additional week in the summer and an additional week in the winter. Is kind of the roadmap moving forward, post 6.0, which is all that really matters. But we're going to look at the past and try to learn from it anyway. Now, 6.0 launched last December. It's been a long time. We went to January 4th, just 4 weeks later, for the half patch. And that's because .0s and half patches work a little bit differently. What a half patch means is not really half, and you're supposed to kind of linger. It's a big bulk of content. So we stretch out, we wait 4 weeks to kind of stall people from feeling like they have to rush through story. We give them the rest, and then that kind of acts as one full-featured set of content for a while. And so that gets us to April 12th, which is a total of 14 weeks. They hadn't, I don't think, announced the roadmap at that point, and it didn't stick to the roadmap, and so that is something to keep in mind when doing the math if we're trying to gauge when is 8.0, when is 9.0. You would need to factor that .0 patches typically run very long. We'll talk about .5 patches here in a bit. Now, 6.1, I believe, dropped on April 12th, that 14 weeks later. 6.15 drops on June 7th, which is exactly 8 weeks. Many of you stopping by stream have been asking. I've been saying mid to late August for 6.2, and that's because if a patch comes early, that's good news for me. Those of you trying to plan to maybe get off work for Savage, that's a little bit different. MizTech did ask in her Mediator interview if they would consider delaying the Savage release. As the patch contents, now that patch cycles are going to be a little bit longer, maybe they delay that to make people feel like they could kind of take their time settling into the new raid and all the story and then go into that, because historically, the 0.2, 0.4 Savage raids have not been delayed, and they would launch on those days. So you would end up with like a 6.21 2 weeks after August 9th if they stick to 9 weeks. I don't know where they're defining summer and winter, so anytime my 9 weeks and my 8 weeks shift around, just know that like those would shake out. I'm just adding a week in roughly when it gets hot in Texas, which is like 9 months out of the year, and roughly when it gets cold in Texas, which is, you know, so like there are official season definitions, but every time I look at those, they look weird. And that's not a season. So October 4th would be our half patch. Now with 6.2, the big thing's going to be Savage. Remember, 6.25 would be maybe that's when we get Relic. We're also looking at Criterion Dungeons there. 6.2x as a whole is also, in theory, when we're getting Island Sanctuary. 6.3 would take us into Ultimate and the next chapter of the Alliance Raid series, as well as give us Deep Dungeon. And so we've got lots of things planned along the way. Remember that the duty support system is being updated. So there was a lot of content in these, so the patches are bigger than they used to be. Individual pieces of content in the game may have shrunk over time, but the individual patches themselves are enormous. So as we look out, you can follow this through. We look at maybe December 6th. So right around a year after the game came out, we would be looking at patch 6.3, the kind of halfway mark. Historically, this is when the story would have wrapped up, so the 0.4 and 5 could have started carrying us into the next expansion. That is not going to be the case. 6.0 was a standalone experience. 6.1 began something new. And so we don't really know kind of what 0.3, 0.4 holds narratively. 0.35 puts us into next year, 2023. Happy New Year's. And then we look at 6.4. Now, at this point, people have been asking, how do fan fests work? How does the hype cycle work? When does all this stuff start to build up? We'll talk about that after. You can see it if you look on ahead down the document there. So as we look out at that point, we are heading into the end of the expansion, 6.5 launching next summer, 2023. Keep in mind we have new data center rollout type things going on all throughout this. And then 6.55 would be in September of 2023. This is me just counting Tuesdays. Maybe I'm not good at counting. Maybe I missed one here and there, but I believe this to be right. And remember, if the 9 weeks versus 8 weeks, if those need to move, it shakes itself out as long as the total number of weeks stays the same. And so that puts us in 6.55 in 2023, but 0.5 to 0.55 has been anything but consistent. Now, as much as I said we can't look at past expansions, I just want to show how variable this has been. So, if we look back at Shadowbringers, 5.5 to 5.55 was only 6 weeks. And then we linger. We have our maximum relic, it's become best in slot, it's kind of a chance to cycle through, they've released all the content, everybody's getting in, they're getting excited. It's also when a lot of veteran players take a break, they play other games, and then they come back rushing as the expansion gets very close. We went 28 weeks to the launch, but maybe Shadowbringers isn't a good example. We had delays for kind of the world being crazy. As a matter of fact, when we talk about FanFest, I'm going to be dismissing the entire FanFest and media tour schedule going into Shadowbringers because it didn't go to plan. Lots of things in 2020 and 2021 didn't go to plan. So let's back up. Let's take a look at Stormblood. 4.5 dropped January 8th of 2019, I believe. That put our half patch just 5 weeks later. Now, for the patch cycles, they were shorter back then, 3.5 months. So you're looking at that closer to that 12, 16 week window, but 5 weeks is quick. And then the second half of that patch, once again, was the longer half. It added up to the right number, right? You're talking about that kind of 24, 25 weeks. You end up with some decimal points because expansions don't launch on Tuesdays necessarily. So, you end up at that kind of 25 weeks from when the 0.5 launched. Now, keep in mind, there's often 0.6s, 0.7s, 0.8s. There's lots of things coming throughout that period. 3.5. Now we're back in Heavensward. Oh, praise be Heavensward. January, okay, these early years. And then February, just 5 weeks again. Very, very short to the half patch. Or 6 weeks, February 28th, and then 15 weeks to June for the Stormblood launch. Raubon Extreme. Now as we back up to ARR, not an expansion, just the relaunch of the game. January 20th is the 2.5 patch drops, and then the 2.55 is a full 10 weeks later, and we get a full 11 weeks to Heavensward. So you can see there's a lot of variability just in general here. And so at this point, if we assume it's 8 weeks, I would say November 14th takes us into 7.0. But I don't know that that's fair. It is very possible that September 19th is late. 6.55 slides in 4 or 5 weeks after July. And then we bulk up that 6.55, that victory lap time going into 7.0. Maybe November 14th, maybe a little bit later. Maybe they keep that December, first week of December type time frame for 7.0. But then we get into wild speculation. There has often been speculation that there would be a 0.6 patch. For history's sake and for factual sake, I will say there never has been. It's always been 0.55. But they are saying we're going to get our ultimate in 6.3. People are saying they want another ultimate. It would make sense to not launch that on top of Savage, so let's say that's 6.5. What if we got another Savage tier? What if that storyline we thought we'd wrapped up and they said, but there's more? So, let's just theorize here. This is wild speculation. Beastmaster, Puppet Master, Geomancer, all confirmed level of speculation. November 14th, let's keep that date at 8 weeks, and let's launch a Savage tier, 6.6. Let's extend the relic line a little bit longer. Let's maybe squeeze another PvP season in. I don't know. Let's do another dungeon. Let's go. Something extra. Maybe we are rebuilding Garlemald, and that's the final step, and all of that. I don't know what all that could hold, but if we added a full nether, the best way to do this, in my opinion, would be to not tell us it was coming until we were right up against it. In 5.5, we're like, that's so weird that they haven't started pre-orders for the expansion, even though they've talked about it. We've had FanFests, we have or wait, why is the date so far out? Are we really gonna linger? And they're like, oh, did we not tell you about 0.6? Mind blown. But that would put the half patch, assuming the standard schedule, once again, keeping in mind that would become the last patch, so it would probably slide up around that 4 or 5 week period. And that would allow us to move to March. But more importantly, That would allow March as the minimum. That would allow them to maybe kick this out to being a summer game. Maybe we slide it into May or something like that, because we've got a Savage tier. We can linger. Maybe you end up with like a 6.58 around March 12th, and that's where they unlock that Savage tier. Let people farm the crap out of it, and then we launch it in May, June, July. And that lets the expansion kind of slide out. One of the hard things is seeing, will like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy sync up, where they're on these every other year, but it's the same year? Do we want winter releases? They talked about how hard that was on the devs. They know that's hard on World First Raiders. Is there an optimal time to release these? And so it just starts to speculate at, well, what would that look like if we were to get a 6.6? I don't think it's going to happen, but you know, that's exciting. Now, how does this work? If we launch an expansion and we go to launch the next one, when do we find out? Now, going into Shadowbringers, we ended up with a showcase and a digital fan fest. Digital fan fest tickets over the last two fan fests have been free, so I'm assuming that's going to stay in place. But let's assume you're coming from World of Warcraft or Guild Wars. Guild Wars did all these kind of digital build-up events. It's closer to that. Maybe you used to go to BlizzCons back when those were a thing. It's like that, but imagine it was only World of Warcraft. There is no StarCraft Invitational, there is no Overwatch stuff, there is no Hearthstone stage, there is no downstairs arcade or any of that mess. It's just Final Fantasy XIV. So, let's back up to the 2018-2019 FanFest season. The last time we were all going outdoors. We'll do this forever, we'll party. I put some patches in here for a little bit of context. So 4.4 dropped September 18th of 2018. We then had the North American FanFest, which you will see the FanFest always comes first in North America. That's when we get like a trailer drop and a name. We get maybe a tease about what the job's gonna be. Maybe they would announce something that's kind of known, like we'll get like female Rothgar added to the game. You should be able to wear a t-shirt that misleads us on what the new job's going to be. We'll guess at it. In hindsight, it'll be really obvious, but we'll guess. A lot of people will guess Geomancer. And so that's all going to happen, and they'll confirm big, crazy things. Like, there's going to be a story. There's going to be zones and dungeons. Classes are going to level 10 times. And so, like, it'll be... It's hype. It's hype. But there's a lot of really cool panels, neat things like that if you get to go in person. They've historically been in Vegas. The Shadowbringers one, when it was in person, was supposed to move to San Diego. Bigger venue, harder to get to. And that would allow them to do... There is an in-person Golden Saucer event, all sorts of things. Those tickets, they sell out really fast. So just kind of keep in mind, as we look at the 0.4 schedule up here, I'm estimating that 6.4 is going to be spring of 23, around the release of when I'd have to guess World of Warcraft's Dragonflight's going to launch. And we would be looking at some time around next spring for the NA FanFest. Now, 4.5 then dropped. That trailer... Anything that was in 4.5 that would have been spoilery, they couldn't have. Plus, they want it to build. So that trailer was actually short. A longer version of the trailer releases with 4.5 context in it. We are now in EU. EU and JP are going to rotate for who goes second, who goes last. Now they're going to start dropping a little more on us. A job change and all of that. We are in February 2nd of 2019. These are 2-day events. I just picked the first day. And then we go to Japan in March, and then we hang out till June. Keep in mind, there's lots of interviews. There's a media tour in there where they let creators and outlets like Kotaku and stuff, not just Final Fantasy, like veterans. So you do have representation of people like, hey, I don't really know what's going on, and I have some questions. Don't worry, those questions get asked too. So it's a big, diverse array. The media tour last time was much bigger than the time before, so I hope those continue to grow and grow. That does mean, in order to gain variety, that they, if there's a community you really adore, maybe endgame rating, there's 5 endgame raters you follow. Odds are not all 5 are going to get invested. They're going to take 1 or 2 and say, okay, that's that community settled. Let's pick more from other communities. So that's historically how those have kind of been done. That's a separate topic. A lot of times that it branches into that topic. I've had the opportunity to go to 2 of those. Hopefully I would go to a 3rd one day. And so... that's where I'm basing that on. I've gone to 1 digital one and 1 physical one. Now, as we look back even further, because we do want FanFest context, you will see that once again, we had 3.4, 2.3. So it does seem like the 0.4 patch is about the right time, which means we probably start hearing about FanFest, confirming that it's going to be physical, maybe telling us that the NA one is going to be in San Diego, venue not confirmed, the EU and JP locations to be determined, all dates TBD or whatever. And so we would look at that, and around that kind of 0.4 time frame, and then we would be looking at, it's ideally, I guess, JP's turn to go second, and EU gets to be the closer. They get to get all the details, but they have to wait the longest. And then we would launch the expansion a while later, right? A nice, healthy number of weeks later. And so that's kind of how these have worked historically. I just wanted to kind of go over that a little bit. I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of how these have worked. Because I think there's been a lot of questions about what is the patch schedule, when can we expect it, will there be a patch 6.5, keeping in mind that the big iconic content, in my opinion, is that we would be looking at relic content that's split across these, hopefully a crafting and gathering thing like Skysteel Tools or Ishgard Restoration or something like that across all these. We would also be looking at Criterion Dungeons, Island Sanctuary, and a Savage tier right here. We would be looking at Ultimate, and a new deep dungeon like Heaven on High or Palace of the Dead here. And then I believe there's more Criterion dungeons scheduled for this, if I remember. But then we would be back in Savage again. And so there's a whole build up here. You know, if there's relic raids, maybe those are unlocked 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, or something like that. So each of these patches will be big and meaningful. If you only like a particular set of games, you might gap out. You might only like the even patches. So maybe you do gap out from August 9th to March 28th. As soon as you get you're done kind of with re-clears, the rest of those weeks are really kind of boring for you. The big gap, the big group that really got screwed was the group that had to go from 5.4 to 6.05. That's the group that really got hung out to dry. Everybody else gets at least something. Maybe it's not the amount of story you wanted. Maybe it's not the amount of crafting content you wanted or the amount of Savage you wanted. But I very rarely see a full community get kind of hung out to dry for a full year. I have trouble thinking of anything like that. Keep in mind that we have Hildebrand, Tataru's Grand Endeavors, New Crystal Conflict maps maybe. Rival Wings will be back in 6.2. So there is a ton of content. I think Mr. Happy really did a good job of kind of talking about all of that. And so I encourage you to go see that. And then if you have any questions you want to come talk about this, come hang out on stream. That is where I'll be. We're doing lore weeks every other week, and in between we are just kind of progressing things ever closer to Omni 90, ever closer to kind of getting into more end game content, ever closer into just kind of slowly clearing the world. I'm almost done with all my shared fate zones, so then I get to start on the real grind and all of that. So I am enjoying this process of settling into Endwalker. I'm expecting 6.2 to be the first one where I really feel like, okay, I have caught up. I really don't need to log in. But for now, I do need to log in. I do need to go progress my hippos. I am one day closer to a hippo, and that's incredibly important. Kinda.